Republican, and it's always good to have him. He's also chairman of the subcommittee on military readiness. And boy, there's a lot of people thinking we might not be too ready with some of the things going on. Congressman, good to have you with us.
John, it's great to be with you this morning. Thanks for having me.
Let's go right to this Iranian deal now that it's coming to a head in Congress. I just had Congressman Randy Forbes, your colleague, on a few moments ago, and general frustration, I think, that basically what's happened in the U.S. Senate, and you can't do anything in the lower chamber, but it's basically rendered everything you're doing right now in the House as it relates to this Iranian deal meaningless, right?
Well, I think that it makes it much, much more difficult if senators are not willing to at least take up a bill to vote yes or no on this agreement. It certainly makes the path for Congress's impact much more arduous. Now, I argue that we should still do our work in the House. We should still send a clear signal that the People's House does not want this deal, that we're reflecting the will of the people, that this is a bad deal, that the President has not complied with what he was asked to do by the Congress, and that is to provide all the details of these deals. Also, to take away the ability for the President to lift the sanctions, which is part of this deal. So I do think the House can act, and I do think that it can do so effectively, put that back in the hands of the Senate. Hopefully, the Senate will at least take up again the bills that the House puts forward, which I believe reflect on some of the different aspects of what has happened with this, and that is the President not divulging all of what he's asked to divulge with these side deals. And then secondly is the sanctions that have been put in place on Iran were sanctions put in place by the United States Congress. And we will be debating a motion today, hopefully to pass, to suspend until January of 2017 the authority of the President to waive or suspend, reduce, provide any kind of relief or otherwise limit the application of the sanctions that were put in place on Iran related to the nuclear program there by the United States Congress. So, John, we still have some opportunities to do that. It's frustrating that members of the Senate will not stand up to what I believe is their constitutional duty. If you've said that you are for or against the deal, why would you be afraid to vote yes or no? Why would you vote to say, we're not even going to allow it to come to the floor for a debate? That, to me, is what people out there ought to be just up in arms about, that their senators are not willing to at least be on the record, yes or no, instead of voting, with this archaic practice of cloture to say, we're going to vote to filibuster this. We're going to vote to keep the bill from even coming to the floor.
Look, it's outrageous to a lot of people, and I for the life of me, I cannot, just like you said, I cannot understand why you just wouldn't want to go ahead and have the debate. The other thing is, now we're learning about all these side deals made with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the acronym IAEA, and the Ayatollah of Iran is saying, look, we're not going to make these deals we made with them public. It's none of your business. Yet the IAEA is the arm that does the inspections and verifies what's going on, which is the centerpiece of the deal. So we don't even know what's in it.
Well, that's exactly right, John. If you cannot verify, first of all, how much nuclear material Iran has today, then whatever standard you set on how much they reduce it by makes no difference. And the deal says that they'll reduce their stockpiles of weaponizable nuclear material by 98%. Well, if you can't verify how much that starting volume is, how much is there today, then 98% of an unknown is still what? An unknown. Mm-hmm. So the agreement then means nothing. And then to say that, well, we can't get into those deals because it's the International Atomic Energy Agency that does that. They don't provide details on these deals. That's the whole basis of being able to confirm whether or not Iran is developing a nuclear weapon. So then the deal itself becomes secondary to the ability to verify that. We talk about the idea of reducing the number of centrifuges, too, by 70%. Iran has actually purchased some very efficient centrifuges. So the next question becomes, if you're getting rid of 70% of the less efficient centrifuges and keeping the most efficient, you can produce about the same amount of nuclear material with these more efficient centrifuges. versus, the older ones, the ones that they're going to get rid of. So there are all kinds of elements of this deal that just defy logic, and somehow to say, well, this is the best deal we've got to do it, and if we don't do it, all these other things will happen. This is a situation where if the U.S. leads on this issue and says, no, we are not going to allow Iran to get away with this, no, we are going to push members of the international community to stand with us to make sure Iran does not develop a nuclear weapon, not just that we're going to slow it down, but to say, no, we are not going to allow them to develop it, then the U.S. can lead. But in this situation, what we're doing is capitulating and saying, we're going to let them develop a nuclear weapon, and we're going to some way, shape, or form slow it down, which is ridiculous to me, because it still puts us in a situation where at some point we will be faced with a conflict situation in the Middle East, and especially as Israel looks at this, being in their back door, and Israel at some point saying we're not going to allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. And if Israel attacks, the United States will get drawn into it. So somehow to say that this is a choice between war and this agreement, I argue that this agreement leads us right to that point. If we were to stand stronger, I believe we have a better chance of preventing war by saying, no, we are not going to allow them at all to develop nuclear materials or nuclear weapons, not just say, well, we got to do this agreement just to slow them down.
Well, look, it's not a real choice. It's a false choice that the President of the United States is putting out there, and anybody that follows this understands that. So, Congressman Wittman, today, as you were saying earlier, you're going to vote on two measures. One, as you said, would direct the president not to lift the sanctions until January at the earliest. So, if that were to actually pass, what happens? Does it go to his desk or stall, or how does that work?
Well, that bill goes to the Senate, so the Senate would then take that up, and then also we have a motion to approve the deal. I think that will also fail in the House. I think the House will not approve it. That gives another vehicle to go back to the Senate for the Senate to take this up again. So I hope that the Senate will take up the three measures that the House has passed. Yesterday, we adopted a resolution that said that the President did not comply with our original motion of what he needed to provide Congress to consider whether or not it should approve this deal. Today we will vote whether or not to approve the deal, and I believe that the House will not approve the deal. And then another motion will come in there to suspend until January of 2017 the authority of the President to make any kind of changes to the existing sanctions put in place on Iran based on their nuclear program by the United States House.
So if you were, and I think, as you're saying, that both things that you vote on today are going to pass, not lifting the sanctions and not to approve it, but for the lifting the sanctions end of it, you're going to send that to the Senate, and they're not going to do anything with that, right? I mean, it's going to be the same thing as what they just did the other day, because they can't get to the magic number of 60.
Well, that's you would suppose that would be what would happen, but it's another way for the House to bring up the issues that we think are important about the full debate of this deal. If members of the Senate have spoken and have declared whether they would approve or not approve the deal, they shouldn't be afraid to bring this issue up to debate it as to whether or not they agree that the sanctions should be lifted. The sanctions put in place by Congress. So, we're looking at every way to make sure that all the aspects of this deal are fully debated by both bodies. I think this agreement has such far-reaching effects that we owe it to the American people to make sure that it's fully debated. And I understand if somebody on the House or the Senate says, hey, listen, I'm for it or against it. But you shouldn't be afraid to have the full debate and to be on record to say I'm going to vote yes or no on these things. So I'm hopeful that the three measures that the House has taken, one of which has passed, two of which will be taken up today, and I believe will pass, should be taken up by the Senate. They should at least have that debate. Hopefully they'll bring it up if they go through the same measure again and vote to filibuster or vote on the motion of cloture so that it doesn't come to be debated. Then I think that's regrettable. But I think that they should at the very least, have the debate about these issues.
Congressman, what power does Congress have to make the side deals or the side agreements that the Iranians made with the IAEA public, or at least such that be debated openly in both chambers?
Well, as you know, we've continued to press the International Atomic Energy Agency to divulge these deals. They continue to come back and say, no, they're confidential, we never divulge these. But they are critical to the public understanding and the world understanding what's going to be done to assure that Iran will live up to the elements of this agreement. And if you can't demonstrate that, or you can't demonstrate how that would occur, then the agreement itself almost becomes meaningless. So I think it's critical, and what we have to do as members of Congress is to continue to push the IAEA to divulge these agreements. Now, they may choose not to, but I think there are other ways that we can continue to push and require that those agreements be divulged. And we can also, through our State Department and other elements of the United States government, get at parts of those agreements.
Congressman, once this Iranian thing is done, everybody's going to be looking at how to get the government funded again. Your leadership has already said there's not going to be a government shutdown, so you forget that, take it off the table. When you take that off the table, what leverage does anybody have? Basically, we're looking at this and saying, okay, you're going to get another debt ceiling increase. You're going to get the debt's going to go higher. You're going to get another continuing resolution or whatever. How do you see the budget fight in the shaping out as it stands now?
Well, as you know, John, one of the big issues that I think we absolutely have to address is the funding of our military. And if we adopt another continuing resolution, actually, the longer the continuing resolution is in place, actually, the greater the reduction in military spending is, even over what would happen with the sequester, which is even more troubling to me. And as you know, we've worked very hard to get money back in our defense budgets to build readiness to make sure we can counter continued efforts by Russia in Europe, by China in Asia, and their aggressive behavior there to make sure that we're countering that. If we adopt another continuing resolution, we aren't able to achieve that. The House passed a defense appropriations bill that puts $63 billion back into our military budget. We're still working on getting the National Defense Authorization Act done in a conference committee, to lay out what we will do to restore military readiness and to do the things necessary for our military. But a continuing resolution stops that in its tracks. It not only takes us to sequestration levels, but takes us below sequestration levels, which we all know creates significant problems for us. So that, to me, is one of the big issues that's problematic about a CR. And I don't know what big budget deal is in the offing in the future. I do know this, that any type of deal must include the increase in defense spending that we have to have in order to replenish our nation's lost military readiness. And, you know, the readiness is the ability for our men and women to do what we ask them to do. They have to be properly trained, properly equipped. We do have to modernize our force to keep up with our adversaries. And when we have these reductions that have been put in place by the sequester, we just cannot achieve that.
The Russians are now, we understand, moving troops into or towards the border of Syria. Putin is increasing his aid to Assad in this crisis, which is exasperating the refugee situation. As you know, for some time I've been very critical of our policy as it relates to the Syrians and Assad. Where do we go with this now? I mean, it is what it is. Whatever mistakes have been made, you can't go back and change it, arming Syrian moderates or whatever. But now the Russians are stepping up. We've got refugees overrunning Europe. Obama says he's going to take 10,000 into the United States. How does, as far as Rob Wittman is concerned, how do we solve this now?
Well, as you point out, John, it's getting ever more complicated, especially with the massive amount of refugees that are moving out of those areas in Syria. As you know, as you pointed out, not just are Russian troops on the Syrian border. We believe that Russian troops are actually in Syria, helping Syrian forces, which further complicates things. Another complicating factor is the intelligence that's being gathered on the U.S.-led effort to fight ISIS doesn't appear to be getting to the president, or at least the information that the analyst is putting forward, which even more complicates things to make sure we have a true reflection of what's happening there and what we need to do to defeat ISIS. And I've been there to visited the Joint Operations Center there in Iraq to see what's going on, to see what our members of the military are doing, as well as Iraqi forces. And I've visited with the Kurds to understand what they're doing, what they see in the region. As you know, that area of the world is extraordinarily complicated. You have the Kurds in the north. You have Shia militias now coming in from Iran. You have moderate Sunnis all trying to fight the forces of ISIS in the region, as well as now Syrian forces that are trying to regain territory there. We're trying to engage our allies. We've had a little more cooperation from Turkey to be able to fly missions out of Turkey to combat this. And the other Sunni nations in the region, too, are very, very worried about this. President al-Sisi in Egypt has spoken out clearly in saying what needs to happen, as well as Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Qatar. So what we have to do, I believe, is engage more of the nations in the Middle East to be part of this. And the United States can help in the effort. It can gather the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. It can help fly air missions of support from the air. But ultimately, if you're going to be successful with this, you're going to have efforts on the ground. And those efforts on the ground are going to have to be Arab Muslim nations that want to stand against this evil. And you know, when you have these other outside partners like Russia now interjecting itself into it, that further complicates it even more. But the only way you're going to be successful with this is it has to be a regional approach to this. The U.S. can help, but this can't be a solely U.S.-led effort if it's going to be successful in the long term.
So as far as these refugees, then, it's frustrating to people that Russia has not extended an invitation to any of them. Either has Qatar, either has Kuwait, either have the Saudis, either has the United Emirates. I mean, it's their problem, and yet we're taking them into the United States, and right in your back door, countries that we pour billions of dollars into aren't doing anything.
Well, John, I couldn't agree more. It is their responsibility to help counter this problem happening in their neighborhood. These are their neighbors, and they need to be helping out with this. This cannot be a situation where Europe or the United States is expected to take the full burden of this. And you know, you see what happens in immigration policies in Russia and even China. I mean, they have essentially, you know, zero immigration from this region of the world. So it's unfair to expect that all the other nations have to absorb this. And it's quickly becoming a humanitarian crisis because of the violence that's happening in those areas. And diplomatically, the United States, I think, has to go to those nations and say, hey, wait a minute. You know, this is happening in your neighborhood. These are folks that you ought to be taking into your country. These are your neighbors. And the right thing for neighbors to do is to help their neighbors. So I think diplomatically we have to do more, as well as our European partners, to go to these Arab nations, these Sunni Arab nations, and say, listen, you have Syrians that are leaving Syria en masse. You need to be part of helping us solve this problem.
Absolutely. It's just very frustrating. You know, once again, the United States is going to take the responsibility, and Obama says 10,000 refugees. We all know that's going to turn into 10 times that. And meantime, other countries that are involved who we give money to basically sit there and don't do anything. It's getting very, I just want to tell you, Congressman, it's getting very frustrating to watch. We're out of time. I want to thank Congressman Rob Wittman for being with us today. You've got a busy day, Congressman. We always appreciate the time. You want more information? Wittman.house.gov, Wittman.house.gov. Congressman, final word. You got 20 seconds.
Well, listen, John, thanks for having me on. Please have your listeners give us a call. Continue to let us know their thoughts and ideas on things.
All right, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Rob Wittman joining us today.